go ahead and give it a try. And I watched him sit there until about 10 minutes before the time was up. And, you know, little sweat beads forming on his forehead. And at the end of the 10 minutes, he jotted something down. And then the very next year, of course not the year that I had him or that class, but the next year, I got the student results back. And lo and behold, my most talented writer scored below proficient. And so I really started to investigate this test. Who was writing this test? Who was paying for it? Who was getting paid? Who was grading it? And I learned some really terrifying things. I learned that we had transferred the evaluation of students' learning away from professional educators and into the hands of Kelly Services, who are the temporary workers that are grading the assessment. I learned that the contract with McGraw-Hill was a closed contract, and so while we were creating transparency apparently in education, we had no transparency for the test publishers that were evaluating our schools. And most disturbing, I just learned this. McGraw-Hill, after 16 years with the CSAP and the state contract, sold their education department for $2.5 billion, and 4 months later were indicted for fraud charges by the Department of Justice. So we really have to ask ourselves, who's keeping us accountable and where we need to really flash the light. I've done a lot of work. I mean, I know we said, Lynn said 10 years, but it's actually been about 16 years. I have 2 daughters, they're 14 and 16, and I have written legislation. I'm the author of the Parents' Rights Bill. We drafted legislation that was a resolution to oppose No Child Left Behind and return the state and the nation to the Elementary Secondary Education Act. So I've participated in a lot of avenues, and I will tell you that really the power lies within us. And the minute that we decide we're not going to play this game, then the game changes. And Lynn was right in saying that relationship between a child and their education is sacred, and it's our responsibility to protect that. So we're going to open it up for questions. Lots of data and lots of information. I really want to encourage you to sign up on the email list because I have a 14-page document that catalogs all the injustices, where the money is going, who the players are, how they're connected to vouchers and privatization. And I think really filling up your toolbox with information is the best way to counter this.
Is your document and are these letters available in Spanish as well? Are they available in Spanish, the documents?
Could you repeat the question before you answer?
Okay.
Thank you.
So are the documents available in Spanish? Given that I finished it just this morning, no.
Very useful.
I'll tell you what, we as activists are really, I mean, we toe a long line. I mean, we finance everything, we invest our own, we don't have staffs, we don't have chauffeurs, we get ourselves to where we need to go, that sort of thing. So I would say that if there's a need, if you guys would be willing to say, hey, I've got some time, I can scan all those Common Core documents, you know, that went out, those kind of things. I mean, we really could use some help. So if you can translate in Spanish, I'll give it to you.
I can't, but I will try to find a volunteer.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, and I'd say for the United Opt-out website, if you go to that as well, you'll see all sorts of guides. We have maybe 1 or 2 that someone has translated for us for free, but there are a ton, and we would love your help on that end as well.
I will say the Coalition for Better Education, the CBE.org, has a parent refusal letter in Spanish.
So you said you just finished a document this morning, and could you say what that was again?
I don't know what the name of it is. Somebody, you asked me if I would write a reform guide for dummies. You said that. You said, would you write an Education 101 for dummies? But I titled it Education 101 by Dummies. So yeah, it is, you asked me the questions and I'll give you the answers. I mean, I can just give you some statistics right now. What's really interesting is that the Colorado Department of Education is one of the biggest winners here.
Well, okay, so that was my question. I'm trying to do research so I can inform my school that I don't want my child to participate any longer in this testing. they told me, and especially because the school was going to be Scheibenberg, so they're going to be taking the science, which now they're calling it EMIS instead of Spark, but it's really piloting it, and of course, they don't know when they're going to be getting it, they don't know the parameters, they don't know whether or not they have the computer capability, and they said, what is your concern? And I said, everything you just listed is my
Yes.
concern. You don't even know what you're doing. I don't need her to waste her day and participate in you collecting data on my student. If she was in a private school, this would be a no. So really, what's the point? I'm looking at high school, I'm looking at plan, SAT, ACT, really, I don't need this. So, but they told me that I could opt out of the TCAP by keeping her home, was one option, but we will no longer be allowed to keep our students out of the EMATs or PARC. Why is that? The state will no longer allow it. It is mandated that you show up. So I'm screwing websites.
Yeah.
And I can only find information, certain things are dated 2 years ago, they're called CSAPs, TCAPs. So then I'm worried, before I show up with egg on my face and say, oh, I'm going to tell you this or this, that I don't have the right information. So is there something new?
Oh, yeah, there is. I just updated all
No,
of
no,
them.
no, but I mean, do they have something special that they can tell me, absolutely not, your child can't take it? And they almost made it sound like, because it's computerized, the day she shows back up at school, they'll force her to take it. So what do? I keep her home forever?
We've been dealing with it.
We
dealing
have been
with this.
dealing with this exact situation for probably the last month. I'm actually almost delirious over dealing with these, because that is the new mantra. The new mantra is, you cannot refuse the test. If you show up, your child will be tested. If your child shows up for your makeup days, they will be tested. That is not the case. We fought this very successfully in Douglas County about a week ago. The parents fought back.
See, I'm Douglas County, that I'm getting told.
Oh, well, there you
And
go.
I was told also by an employee that they have now been told that if a parent refuses, they are to turn them over to the Department of Education.
I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, what are the
Unexcused absences, so they're going to turn me over for unexcused absences.
So this is what you need to do, and Angela has her opt-out letters here. They're also on my website where I've included them. You refuse. You say you're going to contact an attorney. You say you're going to contact the media, and I promise you, they always back off. I have yet to see an incident where they have not. So this happened in Douglas County. We had 3 parents who said, my child will be there when the testing window of that hour and a half or 2 is over that day, and you better allow my child in the door. And they did. It was also an excused absence for those.
So,
That's
see,
section.
I don't really care if she's there or not. I
Sure.
have the luxury, I'm very fortunate. I can pick her up, I can drive her down the road, we can do homework in the car, I don't care if I take it back. But I don't want an unexcused absence.
Theirs was an excused absence, so you need to demand that.
And then I also don't want data put into a computer stating, this is my child, this is her age, this is her grade, and she refused to take this test. I don't think that's necessary. If
Well, they
say
will
something
score
about
her.
writing that in here,
They'll score it as a parent refusal.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I have 2 daughters, they're 14 and 16. They've never taken a CSAP or a TCAP. I've got a 16-year-old, she's a freshman in Arapahoe High School. She's like going second. She just went and took her PSAT. She goes, Mom, I'm a little nervous that I haven't taken standardized tests and I don't know what's going to happen. I said, well, you do your best. 98th percentile. So, I mean, what we want is critical thinking, engaged, creative, imaginative kids. We don't want our kids being put to sleep. And in terms of advocating for your parent rights, we have attorneys that are ready to file lawsuits. And the reality is that whenever parents challenge, they always win. So we don't have many cases, but we love one. And so just please invite them to turn you over to the Colorado Department of Education, because I'd love to see the commissioner come down and put some handcuffs on you. Like that's ever going to happen.
for an A student, right?
Is there a local attorney that is handling stuff like this that you can?
Yeah, we-
refer to? Because you could always say, like, I'm an attorney, and they should back off, but they might call your bluff, and then.
The question is that do we have legal counsel that's ready, willing to do some pro bono work? And the answer to that is yes.
How will we contact this person?
Yeah, just contact me. I'm at angelaengel.com.
I'd like to ask a question of you, and I wanted to see if my perception in this was right. That it seems to me that the U.S. government has spoken on our side and saying that parents have the right of refusal of their child to be excused from any test. Okay? And the state of Colorado has said that no, they don't. And so what the real issue here is the difference between state rights and the federal government, and which one has precedence. Is that a correct assumption then, that how the attorneys would fight that case? Is it a states' rights versus federal government issue?
Well, I think the reason that I'll tell you why the reason the Colorado Department of Education is so emphatic about this testing regime is that in 2000, before we had high-stakes testing, their budget was $2,518,000,000. And now, in 2014 and 2015, their budget request for appropriations was $4,908,000,000. So Colorado's school districts last year, well, since 2009, 2010, they've taken $1 billion cut. But we see CDE, their full-time employment has gone from 395 in 2001 to 576. So it's, you have the system that protects the system. And you have to have parents that protect the children because the system is looking out for reinforcing the system. Federal government does it too. I mean, we're seeing the United States Department of Education grow massively, and we're seeing the State Department of Education grow massively. What we're seeing shrink are classrooms in terms of opportunities. So they have, fewer electives, fewer after-school programs, fewer school counselors, fewer computers, fewer books and libraries and resources. So that's where it's really taking the hit. In terms of, is it a state issue, is it a federal issue? We have Supreme Court rulings that say parents have the right to direct their own education. The federal government gets it, and so they wouldn't dare tamper with that. The Colorado Department of Education, it used to be written in statute that schools had to administer the test. It wasn't until later that parents were opting out. And I have to say, Colorado has one of the initial opt-out movements. Don Pearl started a petition to repeal CSAP. And I think he collected 46,000 signatures years and years ago. In response to that level of grassroots activism, the Colorado Department of Education has become more punitive in their approach. And so while they may say in statute that it's required for the children to take the test, there's no measures of enforcement. And so the problem is they can require it, but it's unenforceable. We have that with a lot of laws. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So just to reiterate, CDE's threats are empty.
Well, let's play this out. What could they do? I mean, they can't arrest us. They can't sue us.
Could they go to child services?
No. I mean, wouldn't you like to see them try?
But I can imagine I can envision it doing.
Well, let me just say this, because I work with all of the states. There have been threats like that in other states, and we find it incredibly amusing because child services is so overloaded and so busy. Do you realize how annoyed and furious they would be to have to make a phone call to a parent who refused to send their child today because they didn't want to take the test? It would never fly.
No.
And I will say this, because this has happened across the country, I have yet to see it happen. They threaten it. These parents still refuse the test. They don't call child services because they can't. It's an empty threat.
But that fear is paralyzing, and those threats. And I'll tell you what, when the masses have had enough, and they will. I mean, did you say 26 tests for a 5-year-old? 18. So we're reaching that threshold of tolerance. I mean, the conditions are what they are right now, because that's what we've tolerated. And when we tolerate it no more, it'll change.
Did they refuse to let your child back in school?
That has not happened. I mean, there's been lots of different things. I mean, lots of threats. So there have been threats about where you can't play, you know, in the athletics. There have been, and the truth of the matter is that we're pretty creative as parents. And when we make up our minds, then we get around it, whatever it is. And so whenever there has been parents that really stand firm in this decision and say, I'm acting in the interest of my kids, and I won't be moved, then there aren't any consequences. All of those threats are completely empty. We have a court case with the ACLU, and there were 13 families that were threatened with things like that. You know, you're not going to be able to attend, et cetera, and so forth. And the truth of the matter is that we didn't have much of cases because every time those parents pushed back, those administrators caved because they weren't willing to cross the line and violate a parent's directive. And I mean, we think that the next battleground for this to happen is in the court of law. And so we're looking for those opportunities. But the reality is that when parents are strong, they win. Because you ultimately have the right to decide and act in the best interest of your child.
I have another question. So Douglas County again, Mayor Hay. And so that was kind of by another teacher suggested to me, did I realize that the teachers would be penalized and the school's going to be penalized? And so, and I listened and I thought, well, that's all well and good, but I've made it to the 8th grade, I've got 4 more years, and I'm so sorry this is happening for you, but I have to be my child's advocate.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to sacrifice my child so you get a pay raise.
So the question is, will it hurt the teachers?
I'm asking, yeah, the reality.
I'm happy to answer that. As I said, I'm in my 17th year of teaching. We're already hurt. Okay? SB 191 goes into full effect next year. If you guys all take this test, I work at a high-poverty school in Aurora. I will fail, okay? I love my job. I love the kids in my school. I have the most amazing teachers that I get to work with. They're incredible. I beg of everyone to refuse these tests because these tests will harm my school. And if they will show that my children have failed, and they say, well, we'll say I have failed. If you don't take the test, guess what? Then I will be able to demonstrate the growth these kids have made, because they all make immense growth. It will not be reflected on that test. So we've already been heard. Please refuse the test.
So one of the things I've heard is that if 5% of the right, 5% of the students are opting out, then the school's taking down one performance letters or something like that. But at 6%, the results are not valid anymore. And we're in a school that is, everyone knows we're like on the brink of blue. We're green, but just about tipping blue. And I feel like one of the things that is on me right now is that if we get a whole bunch of parents to opt out at our school, we might not get to blue, and then we don't get to be blue. And can someone talk about that? And
Do we need to repeat the question?
Please. So the question is, will it harm your school? I'll answer with the same answer. Your schools are already hurt. Okay? If we do not refuse these tests, we need to understand that the privatization movement is going to happen like wildfire starting next year. It will be so fast, we will not be able to keep up, and that is the end goal. PARCC is meant to fail, but it's meant to fail the students. We know in New York, the Common Core test failed 70% of the population. It is designed to fail the schools and shut them down. So schools like mine that are high poverty will be the first to go. For other schools, it'll be more of a slow death, but that is the goal. Our schools are already hurt. So sure, maybe you bump down once on the performance framework. Hey, you know what? I would take that any day over everybody taking that test and making it happen just like that, because that's what's going to happen.
And I would just add to that, that popularity contest, that's a trap. And you have to ask yourself, what are you giving up in order to have the good label? And if you're sacrificing your child loving education, loving learning, and owning their own learning, it's too great of a cost.